Hi again, everyone. From Cedar Rapids, I'm Bob Ask with my story. My story, my life, in the context and in the impact of history. The history that I lived, the history that I studied, the history that I taught for a long time. Today, in vignette number 15, I have a subject that I've entitled, Since Boyhood, the Brothers Duo, D-U-O, with parallel roots to togetherness at Jefferson down the road. You say, where did that unusual title come from? That was the Cedar Rapids Gazette's way of headlining an article that he wrote about my big brother and me when in the mid-60s, when things were just really getting going at Jefferson. He had an article about the brothers and how their paths were so similar all down through the years to the time they finally came together as fellow teachers and fellow coaches at Jeff. He called it the Brothers Duo. I can remember that interview. It was down in the athletic office downstairs at Jeff, and I can remember how he went through the whole story of how things had developed together. And I can remember him taking this picture, which I thought was kind of a clever one. Here it is. He depicted our two sports with differing cleats and shoes, one showing the football cleats that I coached, and one the track, which John coached. And so here is the picture. Here is the article that he wrote about the brothers. Now, how did he go about it? Well, he started the Gazette article about our Ottumwa days. And then he went into our college days where we were together. And then he went to our first stops in the teaching, coaching career movement. John to a little school near Des Moines called Monroe. My first stop was at Marengo, now called Iowa Valley. When we came to Cedar Rapids, first John, he came to Cedar Rapids Wilson, then a high school, and a few years later I came to Cedar Rapids McKinley. And then, of course, when 57, 58 rolled around, two new schools in Cedar Rapids, on the east side, Washington, on the west side, Jefferson. And not only did John Berry, the writer of that article, go through all of that in some detail, but he even went into how our paths were a little similar at church, where John was a trustee, I was a deacon and Sunday school teacher, to our travels. I had just been to New York as a representative of Cedar Rapids at the Congress of American Industry at the Waldorf in Lexington, and John had been to L.A. with a discus thrower, Tom Knutson, to a national meet. He even goes into our first airplane trips of the two. So there were some of those things. He even kind of talked about our travels and our hobbies. Now, you've heard from me about Jayhawk football and some of those things. So I want to specialize and talk especially about John. Um, Let me tell you a little bit about John's track and field at Jefferson. He started the program at Jefferson in 57 and 58. He won Jefferson's first state championship fall track in 59. His team in 62 were state champions early in Jefferson's history. He became the runner-ups with two teams later on, just think, and became the honorary referee of the prestigious Drake Relays. He was chosen to be an Iowa Coaches Hall of Fame person. What a track career my brother John had. In 1969, he led state shot put champion Doug Lane to a national title, 70 feet, 11 inches. And his shot put record, these decades later, is still better than anyone has even come close to. Outstanding track man. And here he is on a national magazine, pictured with John and Doug Lane. What a track story. Well, let's just mention quickly some of his Drake Relays champions, because they'll deserve a mention. John was proud of Ralph Trimble, who early in Jeff history was a state champion in distance. Doug Lane won 5 Drake Relays titles, including shot put and discus. Tom Knutson had 2 titles. John Muskimen had 1, and brother John Knutson had 1. What a track career John had. One to be really proud of. Now, how did things go for the two of us? Well, would Grandpa Johnson have finally admitted the Ask Boys had done okay? Remember how he wanted us to try the toolbox, and that we were becoming too much ball in the head, too much athletics? Would Grandpa Johnson have been glad that we went this route instead of carpentry, if you can imagine? Well, put it this way, Grandpa Johnson, how did Bob and John do? Together, we are in 9 Hall of Fames. Both of us are in the Jefferson Faculty Hall of Fame. Both of us are in the Athletic Hall of Fame, which was instituted in 2017. John, as I said, is in the State Track Hall of Fame, and he's in the William Penn Coaches and Athletics and Coaches and Players Hall of Fame at his alma mater, William Penn. Me, Bob, I won the William Penn Distinguished Career Hall of Fame a few years ago. I am now a member of the William Penn Family Torch Award Hall of Fame, and also the Booster Club Hall of Fame. John and Bob, bragging a little bit? No, thankful, appreciative that the Lord was so good to us and led us in these ways. Just a word about our days at William Penn, because in all those years we got to be two teammates, 2 years, which we found very enjoyable. 44, 45, 45, 46. I caught up with John, who was 4 years older, but I caught up with him 2 years because he spent 1 year at Penn earlier playing on a real good team as a reserve, and then he spent some time in the Navy and a business college time. So he caught up. I was going to be a freshman, and he would be a junior. We were starters both of those 2 years and had a lot of good times playing together. Now, about the Iowa Conference, so posterity, you kids will want to remember, how did it go for Bob and John as members of the Quaker team, which was one of our nicknames before that label Statesman came along. The Iowa Conference had 13 schools at that time. We finished in the middle of the pack those 2 seasons. Frankly, we lost 2 games for every game we won. It was tough, but we had a lot of fun and we had some good victories. Our chief rival was Central College. We split with them, the Dutch, those 2 years. I can especially remember Loras. They were so good, they could have played major college basketball. I can remember up at Loras in their little old gym, getting knocked up to the 3rd row of the bleachers under the basket one time. I can remember coming down the hill on a snowy night in our vans and hitting a tree. And I can also remember one of the newspaper clippings that turned out to be my favorite. Here it is. The Dubuque Telegraph newspaper of this year showed on one side of the page Murray Weir playing for Iowa. On this side of that newspaper that I cherish, it points out how John and Bob Ask are going to be in the starting lineups against the Dewhawks. That's as close as I came to being with Murray Weir. I was on the same page. Well, I think our biggest victory, as I look back, was against Dubuque when we beat a team by 1 point, and it turned out that team was so good that they beat a team, they beat a team, they beat a team, they beat a team. So we figured we were national champions over Ohio State. I should point out we had one advantage. We didn't go very high in the standings, but we had the best player in the league. Jack Oxenrider was scoring champion and was so good he could easily have played, and they wanted him as a Hawkeye. He chose to stay with us. Well, here is a picture of John and me our last year. Here it is. Our last game, playing against Simpson. You can see us there in the first row. Lower left at the end is John. 2 players over, looking kind of sweaty in the process. This was after the game against Simpson, is me. Another one of those pictures that I cherish. John and I, teammates for William Penn way back then. Well, in conclusion, did all this athletic interest and success rub off on the next generation? Because that's maybe the big test of success. It sure did. Well, our daughters, like we said, they had to settle for cheerleading, but for our sons, think of this. My son, Jerry, was a baseball player at Jefferson and at University of Northern Iowa, was a star gymnast, as I've noted in a previous vignette, in gymnastics, and became a successful coach on the AAU circuit for younger players, coaching in 2 or maybe 3 national championship tournaments, one in Boulder and one that Marilyn and I got to attend out in Springfield, Mass, and playing with his son, Tyler. Have you ever heard of the University of Iowa player, Jared Utah? Jerry coached him and sent him to Jefferson, and he went on to Iowa. John's boys were also athletes at Washington. Both had good careers for the Warriors, and both became outstanding officials. Jimmy going as high as the small college national tournaments in football, also coached high school, college basketball. And John, the older brother, also in both sports, and ended up, would you believe this, with a career officiating in the Big Ten. He can tell you some stories too. So in closing, here are the two, the little boys, starting out in the 30s, their careers en route to Jefferson and all this that came about. I'm so proud of John and I, our story.